Let's be honest, there's nothing more exhausting than a rambling account of someone else's dream. Millions of images, disjointed, out of context, dumped on you like trash from an overflowing bin. A viscous stream that offers no foothold for a single thought, no space to breathe, no room for your own response. You nod, you smile, shrinking inwardly, wishing for one thing only, for this stream to dry up. In that moment, you feel not just like a listener, but an accomplice in some meaningless ritual, stealing your time, your energy, your attention. It's not just fatigue, not just an unwillingness to delve in. It's almost a physical repulsion, a deep, irrational desire to withdraw, to close off, to protect yourself from the surge of another's unconsciousness. But what if this irritation, this almost physical discomfort, isn't accidental? What if it's not just a social reaction to something boring or inappropriate, but a carefully tuned mechanism, an internal fuse that triggers when approaching something dangerous? Imagine that this sudden yawn or desire to escape, or even a slight feeling of superiority arising from witnessing another's confusion in the flow of their own dreams, is not a sign of your tiredness or callousness, but an echo of an ancient alarm signal. As if an invisible hand residing within your own depths hastily slams the shutters, breaking the thread, leading into a labyrinth full not only of others' shadows, but also the ghosts of your own forgotten fears and suppressed desires. This reaction, which we tend to see as weakness, impoliteness, or merely a display of pragmatism, is in fact a powerful indicator. It points to the very spot where not only vulnerability, but also colossal, untapped power is hidden. Power that can be unleashed if only we dare to look beyond the screen of this discomfort, acknowledge its nature, and not just brush it off as an annoying hindrance. Why does our internal gatekeeper so fiercely guard the entrance to this abode of the unconscious? Why does it turn a seemingly innocent attempt to share a dream into an act of almost aggression, a violation of personal boundaries that provokes such strong repulsion? To understand this mechanism, which works so flawlessly within us, we need to return to the scene of the very first transgression, to where this almost instinctive defense originated, this deeply rooted fear of what appears on the surface to be chaos, but is in fact the language of our own deep shadow. The internal gatekeeper we spoke of, this ancient alarm signal that flares up at the mention of others' dreams, is not merely a quirk of the psyche. It is not a random glitch in the social matrix, but a carefully constructed, almost ritualistic defense. And to understand its true nature, we must return to its origins, to that invisible point on the map of personal history where our most intimate and seemingly harmless qualities were first outlawed. At what point in your life did you learn that intuition, that whisper of the soul that knows answers before the mind asks the question, is not a gift, but a suspicious eccentricity? When were you led to believe that openness to the unconscious, a willingness to step into the misty labyrinth of the irrational, is the lot of the weak, the naive, or even the dangerous? Do you remember the moment when the right to fear, to deep, piercing vulnerability was taken from you, replaced by a demand for invulnerability, a mask of fearlessness? Most likely it wasn't a sudden epiphany, not a lightning strike that changed the landscape of the soul. It was a process, a slow, relentless absorption of rules passed down from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation. First, gentle hints. What nonsense did you dream? forget it. Then harsher directives, don't be so sensitive. Don't make things up. Be strong. Reason above all. Don't cry. Each such message, whether an innocent remark from a grandmother or a strict admonition from a teacher, severed a part of ourselves. It taught us these qualities: intuition, receptivity to the unseen, the capacity for deep experience of fear and pain, for immersion in the depths of our own I. Are not merely undesirable, they are dangerous. They can make you an outcast, vulnerable, incapable of survival in a world that demands logic and rigidity. Thus the shadow was formed, not as something inherently evil, but as a treasure trove of exiled virtues, like a storeroom where all those parts of our soul that didn't fit into the framework of approved reality were dumped. We learned to hide them even from ourselves, locking them away in the most secret corners of the psyche, because the price for their manifestation seemed too high: shame, condemnation, rejection. And the deeper we hid them, the more monstrous they seemed when they accidentally broke free. After all, if something is forbidden, it means it is either terrible or possesses incredible power. These terrible or dangerous qualities, when they return to us in dreams, take on the guise of persecutors, monsters, repulsive figures. They are not just random images. They are personifications of those very parts of us that have been rejected. The persecutor is our suppressed aggression, our unspoken no, our locked away will. The monster is our uncontrolled wild force, our instinctive nature that we were told to tame. The repulsive figure is our own vulnerability, our unsightly truth, our pain from which we have fled all our lives. These archetypal images are not enemies, but messengers. They knock on the doors of our consciousness, trying to return to us what we once hastily threw overboard, saving our reputation in the eyes of the world. That is why the reaction to others' dreams, to this labyrinth of the unconscious, is so sharp. It is not about others' shadows, but about our own deeply hidden ones. Every story of a nightmare, every image from another's abyss, involuntarily resonates with our own forgotten or rejected parts. It is not just social awkwardness. It is an instinctive cry of alarm, warning of approaching the boundaries that we ourselves have erected around our most vulnerable yet most powerful aspects. Realizing that the bad qualities are actually a resource, not a burden, is the first step towards healing. And this understanding extends far beyond individual experience, touching upon the universal mechanisms of the human soul. In a recent conversation, we felt the flicker of that inner guardian who, like an ancient lighthouse, warns of approaching the uncharted shores of the soul. It signals not an external threat, but a deep, almost archetypal call coming from within. This call is the voice of the shadow. The shadow, as we have begun to understand, is not merely a repository of negative traits that we shyly hide from others' eyes. It is rather a mausoleum of forgotten virtues, exiled qualities, potential that we once rejected, declaring it dangerous or unacceptable. It refers to those aspects of ourselves that were banished from the inner tribe of our consciousness. Imagine an ancient world where each member of the community has their role, their song, their dance, their unique contribution to the common harmony. But what if some of these songs were declared dissonant, some dances indecent, some qualities a threat to the established order? These parts were banished. They did not disappear into oblivion. They went into exile, but retained their power, their thirst to be heard, to be recognized. This is what happens with our inner aspects: intuition, vulnerability, unbridled passion, even anger, if it does not find a healthy outlet. All of them can be rejected, locked away in the prison of the unconscious. They become strangers, exiles from their own inner tribe, wandering on the outskirts of the psyche, awaiting their hour. And this is where the second fundamental principle comes into play, which I call the energy of the unpaid bill. Every suppressed desire, every rejected emotion, every unrealized opportunity is not just a forgotten episode lost to oblivion. It is an energetic debt that accumulates and demands repayment. The longer we ignore these aspects, the deeper we push them into the psychic underground, the stronger their pressure becomes. They do not dissolve into nothingness. They only gain strength like a river dammed by a barrier, whose waters will sooner or later find an outlet, sometimes a devastating one. This energy is the driving force that causes the shadow to manifest in our dreams, in our projections onto other people, in irrational reactions that we cannot explain. It persistently knocks on the door of consciousness, demanding attention, integration, and a return to wholeness. This mechanism of projection, where we see in another what we do not recognize in ourselves, is one of the most insidious manifestations of the shadow. The classic myth of Narcissus, who fell in love with his own reflection without realizing its true nature, serves as an excellent illustration. Narcissus was captivated by an image that was inseparable from himself, yet which he perceived as something external, ideal, unattainable. His tragedy lay not in self-love as such, but in his inability to recognize himself in the reflection. He projected his ideals, his striving for perfection, onto an image that was merely his own unrecognized part. Similarly, we, enchanted or repelled by certain traits in others, often encounter our own exiled or idealized aspects. We see in them either what we dare not accept in ourselves or what we once rejected, and now it returns to us in another's guise, demanding recognition. Understanding this fundamental principle that the shadow is not an enemy, but an exiled part whose energy strives for integration, opens the path to the deepest self-knowledge, for it is precisely in those figures that cause us the greatest repulsion, in those dream images that frighten and persecute, that not only are fears but also untapped resources, the key to the fullness of our personality, are hidden. Our internal gatekeeper, this ancient guardian, tirelessly watches over the threshold of consciousness, protecting us from invading our own forgotten labyrinths. But when its vigilance weakens, when night falls and the world plunges into dreams, the shadow, that repository of exiled virtues and suppressed forces, gains a voice and form. It doesn't knock on the door, it seeps through the cracks, appearing in images that sometimes evoke the deepest horror, disgust, or inexplicable confusion within us. These figures are not merely products of fantasy, but archetypal messengers, personifying rejected parts of ourselves. Pay attention to those who invade your nocturnal world, causing irrational hatred, contempt, or irritation. Who are they? Often, it's the persecutor. They appear as a relentless hunter whose footsteps echo in the most hidden corners of consciousness. Their face is hidden, but their intention is crystal clear: to catch, to disturb, to corner. This could be a faceless silhouette in a black cloak, an inevitable shadow relentlessly breathing down your neck, or even something incorporeal, a feeling of impending threat from which there is no escape. Consider, who in your waking life causes you an irrational desire to run, hide, avoid contact? Whose energy feels suffocating? Whose persistence aggressive, even if objectively it is not? Often this persecutor is merely a distorted reflection of that part of yourself that strives for action, for breakthrough, for assertiveness, but has been locked away out of fear of consequences or judgment. Sometimes the shadow comes in the guise of a monster or an ugly figure, grotesque, repulsive, violating all conceivable laws of nature. This could be a multi-eyed spider, a slimy creature from the abyss, or something whose very existence causes a fit of nausea and primal fear. These figures embody our deepest archetypal fears of chaos, destruction, and what lies beyond our understanding and control. But more often, they are the personification of those qualities that we consider absolutely unacceptable, ugly, or unclean in ourselves or others. Wild, uncontrollable aggression, animalistic lust, unbridled rage, or madness. Who in real life do you look at with undisguised disgust, with a feeling of complete aversion, even if rationally it seems unjustified? Perhaps it's someone who laughs too loudly, is dressed too provocatively, or too openly displays their instincts. These are those who don't fit into your framework of normality, and their ugliness in your perception is an echo of your own suppressed monster. Sometimes, however, the shadow appears not as a threat or horror, but as someone who evokes deep, almost physical repulsion or misunderstanding, though causing no direct harm. This could be a tramp with a dirty face, a person with unusual, unsettling manners, or even just a figure whose aura inexplicably weighs on you, causing a desire to turn away, to disappear. They don't pursue, they don't attack, but their presence evokes irrational contempt, squeamishness, or a deep sense of awkwardness. Think about those who evoke this strange, inexplicable dislike in your waking life. Perhaps these are people who seem weak, dirty, or unsuccessful in the eyes of society, or those who embody your own vulnerability, your dependence, your right to be imperfect, which you have forbidden yourself. This figure is a mirror of your suppressed helplessness, your unaccepted inferiority. Consider the story of Anna, a successful businesswoman whose life was built on impeccable control and rationality. In her dreams, the same image regularly appeared: a small, dirty girl with tangled hair, sitting in a corner, quietly sobbing. Anna would wake up with a feeling of deep disgust and inexplicable revulsion, not understanding why such a harmless image evoked such strong aversion in her. In real life, Anna avoided any display of weakness, both in herself and in others. She couldn't stand crying people, complaints, or any signs of emotional messiness. Her inner world was armored against anything she deemed unprofessional or ineffective. The girl from the dream was not just a symbol. She was a living embodiment of her own long-forgotten vulnerability, her right to tears, to helplessness, to imperfection. This was the part of her soul that was once too sensitive, too open, in which Anna, striving for success and control, ruthlessly banished into the shadow, declaring it dangerous and unnecessary. The repulsion Anna felt towards this girl in her dream and towards weak people in reality was merely a projection of her own non-acceptance. She unconsciously hated in others what she had rejected in herself. These images, however frightening or repulsive they may seem, carry a message. They are not just nightmares, but distorted writings of a soul striving to reclaim its lost parts. And in each of these demons, in each face of the shadow, lies not only the pain of rejection, but also a powerful, vital resource that merely awaits its liberation. We have analyzed how the unconscious, like a skillful playwright, brings forth the figures of our shadow onto the stage of dreams, gatekeepers to the hidden corners of the soul. But it would be too simplistic to see them merely as threats, as the embodiment of what we flee from. The true art of interpretation lies in discerning behind the distorted face of the demon its pristine, unspoiled essence, that resource which was exiled and now knocks on the doors of consciousness, demanding to be returned. Let's recall the persecutor, that relentless image whose breath is felt behind you, whose shadow glides along the walls of dream labyrinths. If in the previous section we saw in it suppressed aggression, an unspoken no, now it's time to ask, what could this aggression be in its undistorted, healthy manifestation? It is nothing less than the right to assert one's boundaries, to decisive action, to determination, to self-defense. It is energy that instead of destroying from within or driving us in circles of anxiety, could be directed towards creation, towards achieving what is desired, towards manifesting healthy ambition. Have you ever felt that you cannot stand up for yourself, that it's difficult for you to say no when the situation demands it, or that you back down from a challenge even though energy for a breakthrough simmers within you? It is precisely this right, the right to healthy aggression, to assertiveness, to the ability to act in your own interest, that you may have forbidden yourself, exiling it to the shadow, fearing to appear rude, selfish, or too persistent. And now this exiled aspect comes to you in a dream as a pursuer to remind you your strength lies not in passivity, but in the ability to assert yourself. Now let's turn to the monster or ugly figure, the embodiment of the unbridled, the wild, what we usually call beastly or repulsive. If earlier we saw in it the fear of chaos, of unacceptable instincts, it's time to realize that behind this facade lies primal life force, spontaneity, creativity, and intuitive wisdom. This is the part of us that doesn't obey logic, that lives by its own rules, that is capable of deep, nonverbal understanding of the world. It is the energy of nature within us, untamed and powerful. What valuable ability or right have you forbidden yourself, exiling this vice into the shadow? Perhaps it's the right to spontaneity, to express your true, sometimes inconvenient emotions, to allow yourself to be imperfect, unpolished, to trust your instincts and not just your reason. You may have forbidden yourself to be wild, unpredictable, fearing judgment, or stepping outside the bounds of propriety. And now this monster appears to you to remind you of your inner freedom, of the inexhaustible source of energy that you have locked away in a dungeon, and finally the figure of repulsion or misunderstanding, the one that causes shame, disgust, a desire to turn away. We saw in it a reflection of our own unaccepted vulnerability, dependence, imperfection. But in its original, undistorted form, this figure represents the right to vulnerability, to sincerity, to the acceptance of one's humanity in all its fullness, including weaknesses and flaws. It is the capacity for deep empathy, for true intimacy, for accepting help, and for forgiving. oneself. What right have you forbidden yourself? Probably the right to be imperfect, the right to make mistakes, the right to pain, to dependence on others, to simply be human, not a flawless machine. You may have forbidden yourself to show weakness, fearing rejection, humiliation, or exploitation. And now this repulsive figure comes to teach you the most important thing. Strength is not in the absence of vulnerability, but in the courage to show it. It calls you to integrate your humanity, to accept the fact that being vulnerable is not a vice, but a path to true connection and genuine strength. Thus, every demon, every nightmarish image that visits you in a dream carries not a curse, but a hidden blessing. It carries a message about that part of you that has been rejected, but which is vitally necessary for your wholeness. These images are not enemies, but distorted mirrors reflecting your unrealized potentials, your suppressed gifts. And as long as these gifts remain locked away, as long as you avoid encountering their bearers in your dreams, you will not be able to fully unveil your inner world, understand its true laws, and interact with it harmoniously. For ignoring these powerful messages inevitably leads to certain consequences, manifesting not only in dreams, but in the very fabric of waking life. Ignoring the messages whispered from the depths of the night never comes without a price. This is not mere superstition, but a law of the inner world. Any energy deprived of its natural outlet seeks circuitous routes to assert itself. And if the rejected shadow, with its formidable or ugly faces, does not find recognition in the light of consciousness, it echoes in our waking life, manifesting as a series of unexplained failures, recurring suffering, or a deep internal dissonance. Imagine an artist whose dreams are persistently populated by monsters, figures crude, repulsive, full of primal, wild energy. He wakes up in a cold sweat, dismissing these images as just nightmares, a side effect of stress, or a meaningless jumble of random neural impulses. A deep fear has taken root in his consciousness, the fear of being too wild, uncontrolled, irrational in his creativity. He fears stepping outside the bounds of academic rigor, fears that his art will become ugly or unacceptable. He suppresses the very instinctive, untamed creative force that his dreams are trying to return to him. The result? His works, technically flawless, lack sparkle, that life-giving energy that distinguishes craft from true art. He feels empty, constantly on the verge of creative burnout, not understanding that his own fear of the monster within deprives him of access to the source of genuine creativity. Or take a person who in dreams constantly finds himself pursued by a relentless, threatening figure that chases him through the labyrinths of the unconscious. In waking life, he avoids conflict, cannot say no. Or cannot say no allows others to violate his boundaries, fearing to be too aggressive, inconvenient, or mean. He is convinced that asserting himself is a sign of weakness, not strength. His fear of being like this demon persecutor, who is essentially a projection of his own suppressed aggression and right to self-defense, forces him to make unfavorable decisions. He agrees to extra work he doesn't want, tolerates unfair treatment, postpones important conversations, which turns his life into a constant flight from himself, from the very strength that could protect him and give him power over his own destiny. His dreams try to teach him to be decisive, but he interprets them as a threat, as confirmation of his unwillingness to confront the world. Such scenarios are not mere coincidences. They are a direct consequence of how our fear of being crazy, too self-absorbed, irrational, or susceptible to the dark sides of our psyche forces us to make unfavorable decisions in interpreting and accepting our dreams. We prefer to dismiss them, declare them meaningless random images, or even more often simply not remember them. Here it is, the key objection. Like a shadow cast upon the light of consciousness, dreams mean nothing. They're just random images, or I don't remember my dreams. These statements are not always a sincere conviction, but often an unconscious defense mechanism. It is much easier to declare the labyrinth meaningless than to admit that in its depths lie truths capable of shaking our carefully constructed worldview. Not remembering dreams is not always a memory deficit. Sometimes it is an active, albeit unconscious, repression, a way for our ego to protect itself from information that may be too painful, too unfamiliar, or too demanding. It is an inability, or rather an unwillingness, to build a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, because on the other side of the bridge may await something we are afraid to see in ourselves. But what if I tell you that the shadow is not only a repository of rejected flaws and dark impulses? What if in its depths lie not only those qualities we are ashamed of, but also those we admire in others, yet refuse to acknowledge in ourselves? This is another side of the coin, another aspect of our inner world, which when projected outward deprives us of access to our own potential. We have already touched upon the twilight paths, those winding ways where the shadow manifests itself in the images of persecutors and monsters, exposing the suppressed facets of our strength and vulnerability. But there is another side to this coin, no less insidious in its beauty, called the golden shadow. This is not the shadow that evokes disgust or fear. On the contrary, it captivates us with its radiance, making us stand in awe. The golden shadow is a projection of our own undeveloped talents, our unrecognized virtues, our inner genius, which we, out of ignorance or fear, have given to someone else. These are the very qualities that, being too bright or too unusual for our usual self-perception, were repressed from consciousness, but did not disappear. Instead, they took on an external form, embodying themselves in people we admire, in ideas that seem unattainable to us, in heroes whose lives seem exemplary. Think for a moment. Who is your unspoken idol in the field of psychology, art, spirituality, or self-discovery? Whose words or works evoke in you a trembling reverence, a feeling of deep resonance? Perhaps it is someone whose insight seems unattainable to you, whose intuition strikes you with its accuracy, whose capacity for deep self-analysis or creative spark inspires yet simultaneously overwhelms. And here lies a subtle, almost imperceptible sabotage. Every time we completely surrender to admiration for someone else's talent, we unconsciously deprive ourselves of the right to possess those same qualities. We gift them our own abilities, the very intuition that whispers correct answers but remains unheard, the depth of understanding that slumbers beneath a veil of doubt, the astonishing capacity for self-analysis that we attribute to gurus instead of applying it to ourselves. We admire another's creativity, forgetting our own, equally unique. We see insight in others, not realizing that our own gaze is capable of piercing through veils of illusion. This is not just harmless admiration. It is an act of projection that robs us of internal power. We become passive observers of our own potential brilliance instead of becoming its source. Our golden shadow, instead of being a beacon guiding us to wholeness, transforms into a mirage, forcing us to chase after someone else's light, ignoring our own. It is precisely in dreams that the golden shadow can manifest in the images of ideal mentors, divine beings, wise figures, or even absolutely perfect versions of ourselves that remain unattainable. They beckon, but do not allow us to draw near, because their true function is not to be an object of worship, but to become a mirror reflecting what we have repressed from our consciousness as too good, too powerful, or unavailable to me. The integration of the shadow is not only an encounter with our fears and rejected qualities, it is also the return of those golden sparks to ourselves, the ones we scattered across the world in acts of admiration. It is the recognition that the greatness we see in others is merely a reflection of our own unrealized potential. This does not mean devaluing others, but rather reclaiming our right to our own radiance. True wisdom begins with the understanding that everything we admire externally already lives within us, and the time comes when these gifts must be returned to their true owner. We have traversed the labyrinths of night, recognizing in the pursuer the right to self-defense, in the monster a wild, unrestrained force, and in the repulsive figure a vulnerability that is true strength. We have realized that even golden mirages, those ideals that captivate our gaze in others, are merely imprints of our own unclaimed gifts. And now, on the threshold of new understanding, I urge you, reclaim what you have banished and what you have given away. Every projection, be it a shadow of fear or a radiance of admiration, is a cast-off anchor of your own power. When we project, we don't just see something externally. We give away a part of ourselves, like an artist distributing their paints instead of creating with them. This is not just an act of self-discovery. It is an act of sovereign reclamation of power, an act of alchemy that transforms another's gold and another's lead back into your own unique substance. Imagine your consciousness as a kingdom. For long years, its borders were blurred and parts of its lands were ceded to strangers, your own unrecognized qualities. Now is the time to redraw the boundaries, to reclaim every inch, every stream, every mountain peak. This is not a struggle, but a reunification. This is not a conquest, but a return home. How then do we begin this process of reclaiming? How do we enter into a dialogue with these uninvited guests of the night who are, in reality, messengers from the depths of yourself? I propose a simple but powerful exercise, the mirror of the shadow and the voice of the depths. When you have a vivid, unsettling dream with a shadow character, be it a pursuer, a monster, or a figure evoking revulsion, do not turn away. Wake up in the morning, take a sheet of paper and pencils, or even clay if tactile creation is more your style. Your task is to capture this image. Do not strive for beauty or realism. Let your hand guide you, reproducing the form, color, and sensation of this character. This is an act of embodiment, of materializing what was ephemeral. Once the image is ready, place it before you. Now close your eyes and take a few deep breaths. Imagine you are back in your dream face to face with this figure, and instead of fear or revulsion, ask it a question, a silent question coming from the very heart. What do you want to tell me? What part of me do you carry? What is your true purpose? Then open your eyes and take another sheet of paper. Write down all the thoughts, feelings, and words that come to mind in response to your question, but from the perspective of this character. Allow it to speak through you. Perhaps it will be a sharp rebuke, "You are too weak," or an unexpected revelation, "I am your rage, which you have imprisoned," or maybe something utterly absurd. Do not censor. Give freedom to this voice. This is the beginning of a dialogue, a bridge thrown across the chasm between the conscious and the unconscious. Repeat this exercise every time such a dream leaves a strong impression on you. Over time, you will notice how your attitude towards these figures changes. They will cease to be mere threats and will become messengers, guides to your own unrevealed power. You will begin to see in their messages not a condemnation, but a key to liberation. This is an act not of struggle, but of integration, where fragmented parts of the soul come together, creating a more complete and stable personality. The process of shadow integration is merely the first step in a vast journey through the labyrinths of the unconscious. It opens doors behind which other, no less powerful forces await, shaping our perception of the world and our place in it. If the shadow is our personal repressed experience, then there are also more ancient, universal structures that whisper to us through the ages, manifesting in myths, fairy tales, and of course, in our dreams. These archetypal images, patterns of behavior, thought, and feeling common to all humanity, await their moment to be recognized and integrated into our lives, giving them the deepest meaning and direction. Their voices resonate from the depths of collective experience, and their messages are no less important for our wholeness than those that come from our personal shadow. Imagine not only a personal history, but also one that has been written for millennia, in which each of our lives is just one chapter, but a chapter capable of resonating with the great narrative. Understanding these ancient voices is the next level of freedom, the next step toward becoming the authentic architect of your